They were briefed on them and told to shut up.
I guess one of the things, at least, that it said in the Post was that they wanted to make sure that there was a presidential order for it, and as long as there was a presidential order for it, that was okay with them.
Yeah, and that suggests their view that, the president took the heat for it. And I think that's one of the issues we have right now, because the White House has been totally ambiguous about the existence of this order. I think in the course of the next week or 2 weeks, we're going to hear a lot more about what Bush did.
Oh, which reminds me to ask you about the FBI memo, which is another indication. I think there are probably 3 or 4 now piling up, that there's an executive order with George Bush's signature on it, ordering torture beyond which we've ever seen or been told, or in fact that the government has denied exists.
Yeah, that's an FBI email that came out of Afghanistan, and that was produced early in one of these litigations. And when it came out, everybody went immediately to the White House and said, is there an executive order? And the White House vociferously denied the existence of such an executive order. But, I've been told, and others have too, that there are directions that came out of the White House that were being cited in the field as presidential authority for the abuse. And if you saw the documentary Taxi to the Dark Side, there's an Air Force colonel in a highly sensitive film that was published there for the first time, in which he, in the middle of a meeting, is saying, but this was directed and approved from the top. Mm-hmm. So, I don't believe the White House's denials that Bush didn't give authority for these things. In fact, I'm convinced that he did give authority for these things, and he's been trying to cover it up. So we're going to see more about that soon, too.
Okay, now one more issue I'd like to ask you about before I let you go here, Scott, is Guantanamo Bay and what's going to happen. I guess so far we haven't heard anything about Obama issuing an order to close it yet, but apparently...
Well, we have the stand-down order. The stand-down order was issued last night.
Oh, yeah? And what does it say exactly?
Stand-down order was issued to the military commissions, basically telling them to discontinue their work. The way it happened is the president, through the chain of command, directed the senior prosecutor in Guantanamo to make application to the military commissions to suspend all the proceedings. That application was made, and this afternoon orders were issued by the military judges in Guantanamo suspending all the proceedings for 120 days to allow them to review and make plans for the shutdown of Guantanamo.
Well, as our last president would say, it's hard work, but we're making progress. I kind of like the sound of that as a good start, but... So,
well, I'll tell you, some more news is that my friend David Iglesias, the former U.S. attorney in New Mexico, has now been appointed as the new chief prosecutor in Guantanamo.
Well, now, I saw that on your blog, and I was going to ask you, what does that indicate? He was appointed there by Bush or by Obama? No,
he was appointed through military process by the JAG Corps.
So it was something that was kind of already in motion.
Command. Well, my understanding is that they wanted to do it, but they were very, very cautious about doing it while Bush was in office, so that this has been announced and implemented immediately after Bush left. But it was done by the military.
Well, but so then doesn't that indicate that they're going to go ahead and continue, or I guess it's sort of beside the point if Obama decides otherwise?
It may be beside the point if he decides not to commit it, but I think it was a recognition that the criticism of Guantanamo was that the prosecutors were being subjected to political manipulation. Remember, 6 of them quit or requested reassignment. And so I think picking David Iglesias, who, remember, was fired as a U.S. attorney because he refused efforts by Karl Rove to manipulate prosecutions, that choice is designed to respond to these concerns about political manipulation. I mean, here's someone who is tested and has proven mettle in this regard as an absolutely independent prosecutor.
Right. Yeah, I just would hate to see it kind of lend credibility to the whole process, which needs to be suspended immediately.
I think the Obama plan is going to be to review all the cases, and they're looking at 4 different baskets. Most of the people who wind up being prosecuted are just going to go into regular federal court proceedings. If there are cases where there's a conventional war crime involving a battlefield capture, then there might still be a military commission, but it's not going to be these military commissions. It'll be a reconstituted military commission. But I think most of the people will wind up being turned over to other nations, People who came from Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Pakistan and Afghanistan are going to go back to those nations. that'll bring us down from, roughly 200 people to, let's say, somewhere between 60 and 80 in the course of 4 months.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and note that all the Europeans, for instance, who refused to cooperate with us in the Bush administration, as soon as Obama was sworn in, they're all issuing statements that they will now be delighted to take people from Guantanamo, including today the Swiss Foreign Office said that the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Germans, the British, the French, the Swedes have all now agreed, now that Bush is gone, that they will cooperate with us in bringing Guantanamo to a close.
Oh, wow. Well, that's certainly good. But now when you're talking about giving the people back, do you think that includes, the handful of people that you could make a credible case are really guilty of being al-Qaeda guys against us or whatever, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and a couple of others? Or you're talking about the rest of them?
I think we've got, some number less than a dozen people who really were involved in 9/11 or other terrorist acts, very serious terrorist acts that we can document. And I think those people are going to be headed for prosecution in the federal court. In
regular federal court with a lawyer and all that, just like they should have done from the very beginning.
Exactly, before a regular judge, regular process. The cases will be handled just like the Trade Center bombing case, the Blind Sheikh case, or so forth. They'll be the same sorts of cases.
Right, which, by the way, all those guys were convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
That's right, and I think there's an expectation that these cases can be brought up, moved quickly, and that they will lead to successful prosecutions and convictions in a matter of less than a year.
Okay, now, I had one more question. Oh, I know what it was. There was Glenn Greenwald wrote about this that. I forgot which interview it was, where Obama sort of implied, at least for a day or two before another statement seemed to contradict him, that, we're going to have to spend a year or so figuring out what the process is going to be, sort of implying that they would set up another new court system from scratch where torture evidence would be allowed as opposed to regular federal courts. Do you think that idea is going anywhere?
No, and that to start with was a misinterpretation. I mean, that was based on an AP story, and when the AP story came out, I called my own contacts inside the transition team and asked about it, and they explained to me, here's what we said, and here's what the guy wrote. He just misunderstood what was being said. I think they are looking at, potentially some changes in civil procedure regarding handling of classified evidence and things like that, but, that's just on a separate track. That's not going to affect these cases. These cases would just go straight through.
Right. But we're not going to deal with any kind of ad hoc new court system with all the same problems we've had at Guantanamo.
No, I think that it's possible that you'll see the administration at some point propose a couple of modifications and rules regarding handling evidence and a few other things. But an independent, self-standing national security court that's sort of a military court, the way it's been proposed by Glenn Sulmazy, for instance, or Andrew McCarthy, no. In fact, note that even though that was tossed around in the Bush administration and they were receptive to it, Attorney General Mukasey never mustered the courage to actually propose it.
Yeah. Well, it could have been that they were just sort of putting it off and hoping Obama would do it. But so if you're the prosecutor, are you up against a real problem here if you're trying to convict Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and yet everybody in the world knows this man's been tortured? I mean, I believe he's guilty. Hell, he admitted it to that reporter from Al Jazeera, and he's the uncle of the guy who did the first World Trade Center bomb and all that. So, he's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I read Bamford. I know he's guilty, but I also know he's been tortured. So how do you convict a man like that in court?
Well, I don't know all the evidence they have. I haven't seen the files, but I'm really struck by the fact that Susan J. Crawford, who is the convening authority here and is a lifelong Republican, very close to David Addington and Dick Cheney, I mean, she had reviewed all this stuff, and she says that he was tortured, and she doesn't beat around the bush. She says it's torture, plain and simple, no doubt about it, and she says that she decided not to prosecute him because of that. Well, if she's reached that decision, then I think we may very well have a problem that any federal prosecutor would have with prosecuting him, and I think that's going to be part of the Bush-Cheney legacy, which is things they have done to people will make it very, very difficult to secure convictions in the criminal justice process. And that would be just as Susan Crawford said, that this blocked the military commissions, right? So it's just as true for the military commissions as it would be for federal court.
Mm-hmm. Or I would think even less true for the military commission than for federal court. So,
yeah. The basic rule, the basic prohibition on torture is implemented it doesn't matter whether you're in federal court or a military commission or court martial, that rule still applies.